So next we're going to cover the external genitalia of women, which is collectively called the vulva. And when we look at the vulva, we have a fat pad that is on the front part of the pubic bone to protect the pubic bone, which is called the mons pubis, which we typically have covered with pubic hair. And then from there we go down into folds that are designed to protect the urethral and vaginal opening. So the outer fold is the labia majora, and the inner fold here is the labia minora. So if we were looking at the vulva in its entirety, these big folds here are the labia majora. The inner folds are the labia minora. And basically these would typically have hair on them, and the inner folds would lack hair. So as we're looking at kind of the orientation of the vulva, at the front of the vulva we would have the clitoris. As we go posterior from the clitoris, we would have the urethral opening, the external urethral opening. As we go posterior from the external urethral opening, then we would have the vaginal opening. And as we go posterior from that, we would eventually run into the anus. So the entire area inside the labia is called a vestibule. And within the vestibule, then we have some muscles and glands that we could look at. So if we pull this apart, we'll be able to see that the relationship we were just talking about is, here's the clitoris. As we go backward, here's the external urethral sphincter or opening. As we go back from that, here's the vaginal opening right here. So we have glands associated with the urethra that are right here, which are called periurethral glands that help secrete mucus to help lubricate the vulva. On either side of our vaginal opening, we have little glands that they didn't really depict well on this model. But you can see it right here on this, which are referred to as greater vestibular glands that also produce mucus. And then what happens is we get a cool process in the vagina itself where mucus oozes through the lining of the vagina, which we call transudation. When women become sexually excited, the clitoris enlarges, just like the penis, because it contains erectile tissue, the corpora cavernosa that we're seeing here. And then we also have erectile tissue that's on the side of the vagina that we see here, which is called the bulb of the vestibule, that engorges with blood when women become sexually excited. And if we put this back together, and we can see that we have the same triangle in women that we have in men. So we have these two muscles, which are the ischiocavernosus muscles, again coming off of the ischial tuberosity, going to just above the clitoris. And then we have a muscle that runs around the opening of the urethra and around the opening of the vagina, which we refer to as the bulbospongiosus muscles. So urethral opening, vaginal opening, and anus as we go backwards. Now the vagina itself is our third hollow organ that's designed to be stretched. So the stomach and the bladder were two hollow organs that were designed to be stretched. And recall that they had folds of their lining called rugae. So the vagina is our third hollow organ that is designed to be stretched, and so it has these folds that we can see here, which are called rugae. So the vaginal orifice is the opening of the vagina. The vagina terminates at the uterus in this little blind area right here, which is called the fornix. And we could get real technical and divide the fornix into the anterior fornix in front of the cervical os and the posterior fornix posterior to the cervical os. The fornix is where semen is designed to pool to keep the semen in contact with the opening to the uterus so that sperm can get into the uterus to get to an egg. So when we look at the ovaries, in anatomical position, the ovaries are held lateral to the uterus. The uterus is midline. So we have an ovary here. And the ovary is kept in its close proximity to the uterus by a ligament that we see here called the ovarian ligament that keeps it in place. We also have a ligament that was cut. We can see that was cut right here that is coming off of the ovary, and that would have extended posterior to maintain the position of the ovary, and it would have been called the suspensory ligament of the ovary, which isn't on any of these models. Now with the ovary itself, when we look at it histologically, we'll be able to see that the surface of the ovary looks different than the internal aspect of the ovary. So we can divide the ovary into ovarian cortex, which would be the surface of the ovary, and then the ovarian medulla, which would be the center of the ovary. And all of the eggs that a woman developed during embryonic development are stored in the ovarian cortex. And then there's a place where all the blood supply and nerve runs into the ovary. And so we saw that in the lungs, we saw it in the kidney, where blood and nerve supply run into an organ is called the hilum or hilus. So we have a hilus of the ovary as well. Now, it's kind of hard to see in these models. And this one appears probably to be the best one. But we also have a connective tissue that's between the ovarian ligament that we see here and the fallopian tube that we see here. So this tissue filling in this space is called the mesovarian. So mes, for short for mesenteria, a sheet of connective tissue associated with the ovaries, so the mesovarian ligament. And we can actually see that a little better on some pregnant uteruses that we'll talk about when we do the development lab in the future.